The December wind carved through truth or consequences. New Mexico, like a dull blade, and Tabitha Kimball stood outside the general store with her hand outstretched, begging strangers for anything they could spare. Her husband had died 3 months prior, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a debt she could never repay. And now the cold ate through her threadbare shawl as she watched people pass by without meeting her eyes. She had been beautiful once, or so Thomas had told her, but grief and hunger had hollowed out her cheeks and dimmed the blue of her eyes, until she felt like a ghost haunting the wooden sidewalks of this dusty town. The year was 1881, and winter had come early to New Mexico, bringing with it a bitter cold that seemed determined to finish what starvation had started. "Please," she whispered to a woman in a fine wool coat, but the woman clutched her purse tighter and hurried past. Tabitha's stomach cramped with hunger, a constant companion these days, and she pressed her hand against her middle as if she could quiet the ache through will alone. She was 24 years old and already felt ancient, worn down by loss and desperation. The sky above threatened snow, an unusual sight in this part of New Mexico. But the weather had turned strange this December, and everyone spoke of it as a bad omen. A shadow fell across her, and Tabitha looked up to find a man standing before her, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent under the sun. He wore a worn leather coat and a hat that had seen better days, and his eyes were a startling green against his sun-darkened skin. There was something gentle in the way he looked at her, something that made her want to weep for reasons she could not name. "Madam," he said, his voice rough but kind, "when did you last eat?" The question undid something inside her. 2 days ago, she admitted, and the shame of it burned in her chest. "I had half a biscuit someone left behind at the saloon." The man's jaw tightened, and without another word he took her elbow and guided her toward the restaurant across the street. Tabitha tried to pull away, tried to explain that she had no money, but he held firm, his grip careful but unyielding. "Name's Austin Lawson," he said as they walked. "And nobody begs for food in my town if I can help it." The warmth of the restaurant hit her like a physical thing, and Tabitha swayed on her feet. Austin steadied her, leading her to a table by the window before signaling to the owner. Within minutes, hot food appeared before her. Beef stew thick with vegetables, fresh bread still steaming from the oven, and coffee so strong she could smell it through the steam. She stared at the food as if it might disappear, her hands trembling as she reached for the spoon. "Go on," Austin said, sitting across from her with his own cup of coffee. "Eat slow, though. Your stomach won't thank you if you rush it." Tabitha took a small bite, then another, forcing herself to follow his advice even though everything in her wanted to devour the meal as fast as possible. The flavors exploded on her tongue, so rich and warm that tears spilled down her cheeks without permission. She wiped at them quickly, embarrassed, but Austin said nothing, just sipped his coffee and looked out the window as if giving her privacy in her moment of need. "Thank you," she finally managed, her voice thick. "I do not know how I will ever repay you." Austin turned back to her, and there was something in his expression that made her breath catch. "Tell me your story," he said simply. "That will be payment enough." So she did. She told him about Thomas, her husband of 3 years, who had been a dreamer and a gambler. She told him about the ranch they had tried to build, the cattle they had purchased with borrowed money, and the fever that had taken Thomas so quickly she barely had time to say goodbye. She told him about the creditors who had taken everything, down to the bed she had shared with her husband, and how she had been left with nothing but the dress she wore and the wedding ring she had since sold for food. She told him about the weeks she had spent looking for work, only to be turned away again and again because she was a woman alone, without references or skills that anyone valued. And she told him about the cold, the terrible cold that seemed to seep into her very bones, making her wonder if she would simply freeze to death on the street one night and become just another forgotten casualty of the hard West. Austin listened without interrupting, his green eyes steady on her face, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. The restaurant bustled around them, full of afternoon diners and the clatter of dishes, but at their table silence reigned. "I have a ranch," Austin said finally. "The Lucky Star, about 5 miles north of town. It is not much, but it is more than one man needs. I have been looking for someone to help with the house, with the cooking and cleaning and such. The work is hard, but I pay fair wages and provide room and board. If you are interested, the job is yours." Tabitha stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You would give me a job, just like that? You do not even know me." "I know enough," Austin said. "I know you are willing to swallow your pride and beg for food rather than steal it. I know you loved your husband enough that grief has been eating you alive for 3 months. And I know that nobody deserves to starve in the cold, especially not a week before Christmas." Christmas. She had forgotten it was coming. The thought made her want to laugh and cry at the same time. "I am a hard worker," she said, sitting up straighter despite her exhaustion. "I kept house for my husband, and I can cook and sew and do whatever needs doing. I will not disappoint you, Mr. Lawson." "Austin," he corrected, "and I am sure you will not." He stood, dropping coins on the table for the meal. "Finish eating, and then we will get you some proper clothes and supplies. Cannot have you freezing on the ride out to the ranch." The next hour passed in a blur. Austin took her to the general store, where he purchased a heavy wool coat, thick gloves, sturdy boots, and several changes of clothing suitable for ranch work. The shopkeeper, a round man with suspicious eyes, kept looking between them as if trying to puzzle out their relationship. But Austin ignored him, piling items on the counter with the efficiency of a man who knew exactly what was needed. Tabitha tried to protest the expense, but Austin simply shook his head. "Consider it an advance on your wages," he said, though she suspected that was a kindness more than the truth. They stopped by the boarding house where Tabitha had been staying, if you could call sleeping in the stable behind it staying, and she gathered her few belongings. A change of underclothes, a hairbrush with half its bristles missing, and a small daguerreotype of Thomas that she kept wrapped in cloth. Everything she owned fit in a small canvas bag, and the weight of that realization settled heavy in her chest. Austin's horse was a big roan gelding with kind eyes, and he helped Tabitha up into the saddle before swinging up behind her. She stiffened at the intimacy of sitting so close to a man she had just met, but Austin kept a respectful distance, his arms loosely around her as he took the reins. "Hold on," he said, and then they were moving, leaving the town behind as they headed north into country that grew wilder with each passing mile. The landscape rolled out before them, all red rock and scrub brush, with mountains rising in the distance like ancient sentinels. The sky had cleared, revealing a pale blue expanse that seemed to go on forever, and despite the cold, Tabitha felt something loosen in her chest. She had spent so long focused on survival, on getting through each day, that she had forgotten what it felt like to simply exist in the world without fear gnawing at her insides. "It is beautiful," she said softly, and felt rather than saw Austin's nod. "That it is. Gets lonely sometimes, being so far from town, but I would not trade it for anything. The land has a way of getting into your blood if you let it." The Lucky Star Ranch appeared as they crested a low hill, and Tabitha caught her breath at the sight. It was modest compared to some of the big spreads she had heard about, but to her eyes, it looked like something out of a dream. The main house was built of adobe and wood, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and a chimney from which smoke curled lazily into the sky. Behind it stood a barn, a bunkhouse, and several corrals where horses moved restlessly in the cold. Cattle dotted the pastures beyond, dark shapes against the winter grass. "Home," Austin said, and there was pride in his voice, the kind that came from building something with your own hands. He helped her down from the horse, his hand steady at her waist, and led her toward the house. The interior was warm, heated by a fire crackling in a large stone fireplace, and Tabitha looked around with wondering eyes. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a rough-hewn table, several chairs, and shelves lined with books and odds and ends. Doors led off to what she assumed were bedrooms, and everything was clean but had the slightly neglected air of a place kept by a bachelor who did his best but lacked a woman's touch. "Your room is through there," Austin said, gesturing to one of the doors. "It has a proper bed and a stove of its own, so you will not freeze at night. The other room is mine. There is a water closet out back, and we have a good well, so you will not want for anything basic." He paused, seeming suddenly awkward. "I want you to know that you are safe here. I am giving you a job, nothing more. You have your space and I have mine, and that is how it will stay." Tabitha met his eyes and saw only sincerity there. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything. I know this must seem strange, taking in a woman you do not know." "Maybe," Austin allowed. "But sometimes you have to trust your gut. Mine says you are someone worth helping." He moved to the stove where a pot sat simmering. "I made stew this morning. Not as good as what you had in town, but it will fill you up. Why do not you settle in and we will eat in a bit? Tomorrow I will show you around the ranch properly and explain what needs doing." Tabitha took her small bag into the room he had indicated and closed the door behind her, leaning against it as emotion washed over her in a wave. The room was simple but clean, with a bed covered in quilts, a small dresser, and a window that looked out over the pastures. A stove sat in the corner, already lit and radiating warmth. It was more than she had dared hope for, more than she deserved, and she found herself sliding down to sit on the floor, her hands pressed to her face as silent sobs shook her frame. She had been so close to giving up, so close to simply lying down in the cold and letting it take her. And now here she was, in a warm house with a full stomach and the promise of work, rescued by a stranger with green eyes and a kindness that defied understanding. It felt like a miracle, and Tabitha was not sure she believed in miracles anymore, but she would take this one and hold it close and do everything in her power to prove herself worthy of it. That night, after a simple meal eaten mostly in comfortable silence, Tabitha lay in her new bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind howl outside. She could hear Austin moving around in the other room, the creak of floorboards and the soft sound of him banking the fire for the night. He was a puzzle, this cowboy who had given her everything without asking for anything in return. She had met good men before. Her Thomas had been good, but there was something different about Austin, something solid and steady that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt in a long time. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it was deep and dreamless, the sleep of someone who had finally found shelter from the storm. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Tabitha woke early, well before dawn, and made breakfast for herself and Austin. He taught her how he liked his coffee, strong and black, and she learned that he had a weakness for biscuits with honey. After breakfast, he would head out to tend the cattle and horses, and she would set about cleaning the house, mending clothes, and preparing the midday meal. The work was hard, harder than she had expected, but it was honest work, and she threw herself into it with a determination born of gratitude. Austin was a man of few words, but Tabitha found she liked that about him. He did not fill the silence with empty chatter, and when he did speak, it was to say something worth hearing. He told her about the ranch, how he had built it up from nothing over the past 8 years, working as a trail hand and saving every penny until he could afford to buy the land. He told her about the harsh summers and the mild winters, though this year had been different, colder than anyone could remember. And he told her about the cattle, each animal seemingly as familiar to him as old friends, known by sight and temperament. In turn, Tabitha found herself talking about things she had not spoken of in months. She told Austin about her childhood in Missouri, about her father who had been a school teacher and her mother who had died when Tabitha was 12. She told him about meeting Thomas at a church social, how he had swept her off her feet with his grand dreams and easy smile. And she told him, haltingly, about the guilt she carried, the feeling that she should have done more, been more, somehow saved her husband from the fever that took him. "You cannot think like that," Austin said one evening as they sat by the fire after supper. "Fever takes who it wants, and no amount of wishing or doing can change that. Your husband would not want you eating yourself alive with guilt. How can you know that?" Tabitha asked, her voice sharp with old pain. "Because I lost someone too," Austin said quietly. "My younger brother, Sam. He was 18, full of life and dreams. Got thrown from a horse and broke his neck. Died before we could even get him to town. I spent a year blaming myself, thinking of all the things I should have done different. But in the end, I realized that the only thing I was doing was wasting the life I still had. Sam would have hated that, so I let the guilt go and just tried to live in a way that would make him proud." Tabitha looked at Austin with new eyes, seeing the grief that he carried beneath his steady exterior. "I am sorry," she said softly. "That is a terrible loss. It is, but it is part of life out here. The West does not care about fair or right, it just is. All we can do is take care of each other and keep moving forward." The words stayed with Tabitha as December wore on. Christmas came and went, marked by a simple meal and a gift exchange that made her eyes burn with tears. Austin gave her a beautiful wool shawl, deep blue like twilight, that he said reminded him of her eyes. She gave him a set of leather gloves she had spent every evening for a week making, stitching them by firelight while he read or worked on mending tack. He seemed genuinely pleased, trying them on immediately and flexing his hands with an appreciative nod. The new year arrived with a cold snap that froze the water in the troughs and turned the ground hard as stone. Tabitha and Austin worked together to keep the animals fed and watered, breaking ice and hauling feed, and she marveled at how natural it felt to work beside him. He never questioned her ability or treated her as fragile, but he also watched out for her, making sure she did not overwork herself or take on more than she could safely handle. It was during one of these frozen January days that something shifted between them. Tabitha was in the barn, trying to coax a pregnant mare into eating, when she heard a commotion from outside. She rushed to the door to find Austin wrestling with a steer that had gotten tangled in loose wire, the animal panicking and thrashing while blood streaked its hide. Without thinking, Tabitha ran to help, grabbing a rope and working to secure the steer's back legs while Austin dealt with the wire. It took both of them and a good 20 minutes of struggle, but they finally got the animal free and doctored its cuts. The steer bolted off to join the herd, apparently no worse for wear, and Tabitha and Austin stood in the cold, breathing hard and covered in mud and blood. Then Austin started to laugh, a deep, genuine sound that Tabitha had never heard from him before, and she found herself laughing too, giddy with relief and the strange joy of shared struggle. "You are something else, Tabitha Kimball," Austin said, grinning at her in a way that made her heart do something complicated in her chest. Most women would have stayed in the house. Most women did not grow up helping their father doctor every sick animal in the county, Tabitha shot back, still smiling. Besides, you needed help. That I did. Austin's expression softened, and he reached out to wipe a smudge of mud from her cheek, his touch gentle. Thank you. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Tabitha could not name, and then Austin stepped back, clearing his throat. We should get cleaned up before we freeze. That night, as Tabitha lay in bed, she realized with a start that she had not thought about Thomas once during the entire day. The guilt that followed that realization was sharp and immediate, but beneath it was something else, something that felt almost like relief. She had loved her husband, would always love him, but he was gone, and she was still here, still alive. And perhaps it was not a betrayal to notice that she felt happy for the first time in months. February brought warmer weather and the first signs of spring. The cattle began to calve, which meant long nights checking on the herd and helping with difficult births. Tabitha discovered she had a knack for it, her small hands useful for turning a breeched calf or helping a heifer too exhausted to push. Austin watched her work with an expression that made her flush with pleasure, and more than once she caught him looking at her with something in his eyes that was not just gratitude or friendship. They began to talk more, deeper conversations that stretched long into the evening. Austin told her about his dreams for the ranch, how he wanted to expand the herd and maybe start breeding horses. Tabitha told him about her love of reading, how she had always imagined opening a small school one day and teaching children. They discovered shared tastes in books and a mutual love of music, though neither could carry a tune to save their lives. And slowly, carefully, they began to share the spaces between words, the comfortable silences that spoke of growing intimacy. It was a Saturday in late February when things came to a head. Austin had ridden into town for supplies, and Tabitha spent the day giving the house a thorough cleaning and preparing a special supper. She told herself it was just to show her appreciation, but the truth was she wanted to do something nice for him, wanted to see that smile that made his whole face light up. She made his favorite stew, baked fresh bread, and even attempted a pie using the last of the preserved apples from the cellar. Austin returned as the sun was setting, riding in with packages tied to his saddle and a strange look on his face. He helped her unload the supplies, quiet in a way that made Tabitha nervous, and then finally turned to her as they stood in the kitchen. I saw Mrs. Henderson in town, he said abruptly. She runs the boarding house on 3rd Street. She mentioned that she is looking for a permanent tenant, someone to help her manage the place in exchange for room and board and a small wage. Tabitha felt her stomach drop. Oh, she managed. That is good of her. I told her I would mention it to you, Austin continued, not meeting her eyes. If you want the position, I am sure it would be steadier than working out here. Closer to town, more opportunities to meet people. Is that what you want? Tabitha asked, her voice carefully neutral. For me to take that position? Austin was silent for a long moment. When he finally looked at her, his green eyes were full of conflict. No, he said roughly, but I do not want you to stay here just because you feel obligated. You have been working off the debt you think you owe me for months now, Tabitha. You do not owe me anything. If you want to go to start fresh somewhere else, I will not stop you. What if I do not want to go? Tabitha heard herself say, her heart pounding. What if I want to stay here? Then stay, Austin said, and there was something raw in his voice. God help me, I want you to stay, but I will not ask that of you, will not make you feel like you have to choose between staying here and having your freedom. Tabitha crossed the space between them, moving before she could second-guess herself. She reached up and took Austin's face in her hands, feeling the rough stubble of his jaw against her palms. "I am choosing to stay," she said clearly. "Not because I owe you anything, but because this is where I want to be. Here with you, if you want that too." Austin's hands came up to cover hers, his eyes searching her face. "I have wanted that since the day I saw you standing in the cold, trying to be brave even though you were breaking apart inside," he admitted. "But I did not want to push. You have been through so much, Tabitha. The last thing I wanted was to make you feel pressured." "You could never do that," Tabitha said softly. "You have given me back my life, Austin, given me a home and work and a reason to wake up in the morning, and somewhere along the way you gave me something else. Hope, the feeling that maybe I could be happy again." Austin kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that held months of restrained longing and careful patience. Tabitha leaned into him, and felt something in her chest that had been locked tight since Thomas's death finally begin to open. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard, and Austin rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "I know it might be too soon, that you might not be ready to hear it, but I have to say it. I love you, Tabitha Kimball, and I want you in my life, not as my employee but as my partner. As my wife, if you will have me." Tabitha felt tears streak down her face, but they were not tears of grief this time. "I love you too," she whispered. "I did not think I could feel this way again, did not think my heart had room for it, but I do. I love you, Austin Lawson, and yes, I will marry you. Yes." They held each other in the kitchen as the supper cooled and the light faded, neither willing to let go, and Tabitha felt a peace settle over her that she had not known in years. The road ahead would not be easy, she knew that. Ranch life was hard, and there would be struggles and setbacks and grief mixed in with the joy. But they would face it together, and that made all the difference. They married in truth or consequences on a bright March day with half the town in attendance. Mrs. Henderson wept through the entire ceremony, and even the crusty old shopkeeper looked misty-eyed as Austin slipped a simple gold band onto Tabitha's finger. They celebrated at the restaurant where Austin had first bought her a meal, and Tabitha thought about how far she had come from the desperate woman begging for scraps in the December cold. She had been so certain her life was over, that she had nothing left to live for, and now here she was, married to a good man and starting a new chapter in a story she thought had ended. The spring and summer passed in a blur of hard work and quiet happiness. Tabitha threw herself into making the ranch house a true home, sewing curtains and planting a garden and filling the shelves with preserves for the winter to come. Austin taught her to ride properly, and she spent many evenings on horseback beside him, checking the herd and watching the sun set over the New Mexico landscape. They talked and laughed and built the kind of partnership that came from two people who had both known loss and learned to value what they had. In late summer, Tabitha realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex tangle of emotions. Joy, certainly, but also fear that something would go wrong, that she would lose this child the way she had lost everything else. Austin seemed to sense her worry, and he was endlessly patient, holding her when the fear got too great and reminding her that they would face whatever came together. "Boy or girl, it does not matter," he said one night, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "As long as you are both healthy, that is all I care about." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and as Tabitha's belly grew, so did her confidence. The women of truth or consequences, who had once looked past her when she begged on the street, now welcomed her into their circle, sharing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes, and the kind of community support that made Tabitha's eyes sting with grateful tears. She had a place here now, a real place, and people who cared about her. Austin was attentive to the point of being comical, constantly worrying about whether she was doing too much or needed anything. Tabitha bore it with good humor, though she drew the line when he suggested she stop helping with the ranch work entirely. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she informed him tartly. "I will rest when I need to, but I am not spending the next several months sitting in a chair doing nothing." Their son was born on a cold February morning, almost exactly a year after the day Tabitha and Austin had first admitted their feelings for each other. The labor was long and difficult, attended by the midwife from town in Austin, who refused to leave Tabitha's side despite the midwife's protests that it was not proper. Tabitha did not care about proper. She needed Austin's hand to hold, his voice telling her she was strong and brave. And when their son finally entered the world with a lusty cry, Austin was there to cut the cord and place the squalling infant in her arms. "He is perfect," Austin said hoarsely, tears streaming down his weathered face. "You did so well, Tabitha. He is perfect." They named him Samuel Thomas, honoring both Austin's brother and Tabitha's first husband, and the baby proved to have his father's green eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. Samuel was colicky and demanding, keeping them up at all hours, but neither Tabitha nor Austin minded. The ranch house rang with the sounds of new life, and Tabitha found herself marveling at how much her world had changed in just over a year. One evening, when Samuel was about 3 months old, Tabitha and Austin sat on the porch watching the sun set while their son slept peacefully in his cradle. The air was warm with the promise of spring, and the cattle lowed softly in the distance. "You ever think about that December day?" Austin asked quietly. "When I found you in town." "Every day," Tabitha admitted. "I think about how close I came to giving up, and then I look at our life now and can barely believe it is real." "You saved me, Austin." "We saved each other," Austin corrected gently. "I was so lonely before you came, Tabitha. I had the ranch, had my work, but I did not have anyone to share it with. You gave me a reason to come home at night, gave me a family. That is worth more than all the cattle in New Mexico." Tabitha leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she said simply. "I love Thomas, and I will always carry a piece of him with me. But you are my future, Austin. You and Samuel, this life we are building together, this is where I belong." Austin kissed the top of her head. "And this is where you will always be," he promised. "Home." The years that followed were not without their challenges. There were harsh winters and dry summers, cattle lost to illness and predators, and the constant struggle to make ends meet that defined ranch life. But Tabitha and Austin faced it all together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing season. Samuel grew into a bright, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, learning the ranch from the ground up. And 2 years after Samuel's birth, Tabitha gave birth to twin daughters, auburn-haired and fierce, who kept the entire household on their toes. Tabitha never forgot where she had come from, never forgot that December cold and the desperation that had driven her to beg on the street. She made sure that anyone who came to the Lucky Star in need found a hot meal and a helping hand. And more than once she and Austin hired on drifters or struggling families, giving them a chance to get back on their feet. It was their way of paying forward the kindness that had saved Tabitha's life, and both of them felt it was the least they could do. On the 10th anniversary of the day they met, Austin surprised Tabitha with a trip back to Truth or Consequences. They left the children with Mrs. Henderson, who doted on them shamelessly, and Austin led Tabitha through the town to the spot where she had stood begging all those years ago. "I want you to see something," he said, and handed her a document. Tabitha unfolded it, her eyes widening as she read. It was a deed, transferring full ownership of the Lucky Star Ranch to her name as well as his, making them equal partners in truth as well as in spirit. "Austin," she breathed, "this is too much." "It is not enough," Austin said firmly. "You have worked as hard as I have to build the Lucky Star into what it is today. It is your home, Tabitha, and I want that in writing. Besides," he added with a slight grin, "someone has to make sure I do not do something stupid with the place." Tabitha laughed through her tears and threw her arms around his neck, kissing him soundly in the middle of the street without caring who saw. They were no longer the desperate widow and the lonely cowboy who had found each other in the cold. They were partners, husband and wife, parents, ranchers and friends. They were home. The Lucky Star Ranch prospered over the years, growing from a modest operation into one of the most respected spreads in the territory. Samuel grew into a young man who loved the land as much as his father did. And the twins, who everyone agreed had inherited their mother's sharp mind and their father's stubbornness, showed every sign of being forces to be reckoned with in their own right. Tabitha started the small school she had always dreamed of, teaching the children of neighboring ranches in a room they added onto the house. And Austin took on more hired hands, creating jobs for men who needed them and building a real community around the Lucky Star. Through it all, Tabitha never lost sight of the miracle that had saved her life. Every December, as the weather turned cold and the anniversary of their meeting approached, she and Austin would stand together on the porch and remember. They remembered the desperate woman begging for scraps, the cowboy who had seen her and decided to help, and the love that had grown from that moment of kindness. It was a story they told their children and grandchildren in years to come, a story about the power of compassion and second chances, and the way love could grow in the most unexpected places. But that was all in the future. For now, on this particular evening as they stood looking out over their land, Tabitha was simply content. The December sky was clear and cold, stars beginning to emerge in the deepening twilight, and she could hear their children laughing in the house behind them. Austin's arm was around her shoulders, solid and warm, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She had begged for scraps in the December cold, certain her life was over, and Austin had given her so much more than food or shelter. He had given her his ranch to call home, his heart to hold, and a future bright with possibility. It was more than she had dared to dream, and she was grateful for every single day of it. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of coming snow, and Tabitha shivered slightly. Austin pulled her closer, and together they went back into the warmth of their home, closing the door on the cold and stepping into the light and love that waited within. The Lucky Star Ranch was theirs, a testament to what two people could build when they worked together, and it would stand for generations to come, a legacy of the love that had started with a simple act of kindness on a cold December day. As spring arrived that year, bringing with it the annual rush of calving season and planting, Tabitha found herself reflecting on how completely her life had transformed. She was no longer the hollow-eyed widow begging on the streets of truth or consequences. She was a rancher's wife, a mother, a teacher, and a woman who had learned that life could surprise you with joy even after it had broken your heart. The Lucky Star had become more than just Austin's ranch or even their ranch. It had become a symbol in the community, a place where people knew they could turn if they needed help. Tabitha made sure their home was always open to travelers, and Austin never turned away a man looking for honest work. They had built something bigger than themselves, and both of them felt the weight and pride of that responsibility. One afternoon in early April, as Tabitha was working in her garden while the twins played nearby, and Samuel helped his father mend fence in the south pasture. A wagon rolled up the long drive to the ranch house. Tabitha straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and watched as a young woman climbed down from the driver's seat. She was thin to the point of gauntness, with haunted eyes that Tabitha recognized all too well. "Can I help you?" Tabitha called, wiping her hands on her apron as she approached. "I am sorry to bother you, madam," the woman said, her voice trembling slightly. "I heard in town that you sometimes hire help. I am looking for work. I can cook and clean and work hard. I will do anything, really. I just need a chance." Tabitha felt her heart squeeze with recognition and sympathy. She saw herself in this woman, saw the desperation and the pride warring in her expression. "What is your name?" she asked gently. "Rose Turner, madam. I am a widow. My husband died last fall, and I have been trying to make my way ever since." Rose's chin lifted slightly despite the fear in her eyes. "I am not looking for charity. I will earn my keep." "I am sure you will," Tabitha said warmly. "Come inside, Rose. Let me get you something to eat and we can talk about what needs doing around here. I could use help with the house and the children, and my husband can always use another hand during busy seasons." Rose's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "You do not know what this means." "I think I do," Tabitha said softly, thinking of a December day and a cowboy with kind eyes. "I think I know exactly what it means." She led Rose into the house, settled her at the kitchen table with food and coffee, and listened to her story. It was achingly familiar. A husband lost, debts that could not be paid, and the slow slide into poverty and desperation. But unlike Tabitha's story, this one would have a different trajectory because Tabitha and Austin were here to help, just as Austin had helped her. When Austin came in that evening, Tabitha explained the situation. He listened carefully, then nodded. "We can set her up in the spare room in the bunkhouse," he said. "Make sure she has privacy and everything she needs, and if she is willing to work, God knows there is plenty to do." Rose Turner proved to be an excellent worker, quiet and efficient, and within a few weeks, she had become an integral part of the Lucky Star operation. Tabitha watched her slowly come back to life, the haunted look in her eyes fading as she gained weight and confidence. It was like watching her own journey in reverse, and it filled Tabitha with a deep sense of purpose. Summer brought its own challenges and rewards. The cattle thrived on the summer grass, and the garden Tabitha had planted produced abundantly. They canned and preserved, preparing for the winter to come, and in the evenings the ranch was filled with the sounds of laughter and music. Austin had surprised everyone by purchasing a piano in town and having it hauled out to the ranch, and though none of them were particularly talented, they all enjoyed gathering around it after supper and attempting songs. Samuel, now a lanky 12-year-old, had developed a gift with horses that amazed even his father. He could gentle the most skittish colt with patience and quiet words, and Austin began talking about starting a horse breeding program in earnest, with Samuel taking the lead. The twins, 8 years old and identical in appearance but completely different in temperament, spent their days helping their mother with everything from cooking to teaching the younger children who came to Tabitha's small school. It was a full life, sometimes overwhelmingly so, but Tabitha would not have traded it for anything. She looked at the family she and Austin had built, the community they had created, and felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with material wealth and everything to do with purpose and love. That fall, Austin came to Tabitha with an idea. "I have been thinking," he said as they sat on the porch one evening after the children were asleep. "We have done well with the Lucky Star, better than I ever imagined when I first bought this land. What would you think about expanding? There is a parcel of land to the east that has come up for sale, good grazing land with water access. If we bought it, we could increase the herd significantly. Tabitha considered the proposal carefully. It would mean taking on debt, she said slowly, and more work than we already have. It would, Austin agreed, but I think we are ready for it. We have good help now, and Samuel is old enough to take on real responsibility. And you have your school going strong, bringing in extra income. I think we could make it work, but only if you agree. This is your ranch too, Tabitha. I will not make a decision this big without you being fully on board. The fact that he consulted her as an equal partner, that he genuinely valued her opinion and would not move forward without her agreement, made Tabitha love him even more. Let us do it, she said finally. Let us grow the Lucky Star into something even bigger, something we can pass on to our children and their children. They shook on it there on the porch, and then Austin pulled her close and kissed her, and Tabitha marveled once again at how lucky she was to have found this man, this life. They had both been broken when they met, both carrying grief and loss, but together they had built something strong and beautiful. The expansion was not easy. There were long days of hard work, financial worries that kept them both awake at night, and setbacks that tested their resolve. But they worked through it together, making decisions as a team and supporting each other through the difficult times. Rose proved invaluable, taking on more of the household responsibilities so that Tabitha could work more closely with Austin on the ranch operations. And Samuel stepped up in ways that made both his parents proud, showing the kind of work ethic and good judgment that marked him as a true rancher in the making. By the time winter arrived again, the expansion was complete and successful. The Lucky Star had doubled in size, and with it, their standing in the community. Austin was elected to the local Cattlemen's Association, and Tabitha found herself being asked to serve on the school board for Truth or Consequences. They were respected members of the community, far removed from the desperate widow and the lonely cowboy who had found each other on a cold December day. But they never forgot where they had come from. Every year, on the anniversary of the day they met, Austin and Tabitha would make the trip into town and visit the spot where he had first seen her begging for food. They would stand there together, remembering, and then they would go to the church and make a generous donation to the fund that helped widows and orphans in need. It was their tradition, their way of honoring the past while looking toward the future. On the 15th anniversary of that December day, as they stood in their usual spot, Tabitha said softly, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had just walked past me that day, if you had not stopped?" Austin was quiet for a long moment. "I cannot imagine it," he finally said. "Cannot imagine my life without you in it. I think I was meant to find you that day, Tabitha. I think we were meant to save each other." "I think you are right," Tabitha agreed, leaning into his warmth. "I think some things are just meant to be." They returned to the ranch to find a celebration waiting for them. Rose, who had become like a sister to Tabitha over the years, had organized a surprise party with the help of the children and several neighboring families. The house was full of people, food, and laughter, and Tabitha looked around with shining eyes at the life they had built. Samuel, now a young man of 18, stood tall beside a pretty girl from a neighboring ranch, and Tabitha had a feeling there would be another wedding in their future before too long. The twins, 14 and beautiful despite the ranch dust and worn clothes, were entertaining the younger children with stories. Rose was moving through the crowd with trays of food, smiling in a way that lit up her entire face. And Austin stood beside Tabitha, his hand in hers, surveying their kingdom with pride and satisfaction. "Happy anniversary," he murmured, bending to kiss her temple. "Thank you for taking a chance on a lonely cowboy." "Thank you for giving a desperate widow a home," Tabitha replied, squeezing his hand. "And a family, and a future. Thank you for everything, Austin." The party lasted well into the night, and when everyone had finally gone home and the children were asleep, Austin and Tabitha walked out to the barn together. It was their habit on special occasions, this quiet time in the place where so much of their daily life happened. The horses nickered softly in their stalls, and the smell of hay and leather was comforting and familiar. "I have been thinking about Samuel," Austin said as they leaned against the fence of the training corral. "He is a man now, ready to start making his own way. What would you think about deeding him a portion of the ranch, letting him build his own house and start his own herd? He could still work with us, but it would give him independence." "I think that is a wonderful idea," Tabitha said. "He has certainly earned it. And I suspect he will want to bring a wife home before too long, if the way he looks at Mary Henderson is any indication." Austin chuckled. "Mary is a good girl. She would make a fine rancher's wife, though I am not sure I am ready to think about my son being married." "You had better get ready," Tabitha teased, "because it is coming whether you are prepared or not. Our children are growing up, Austin. Soon they will have children of their own and we will be grandparents." "Grandparents," Austin repeated, testing the word. "I suppose I can live with that. As long as I still have you beside me." "Always," Tabitha promised. "For as long as we both shall live and probably beyond that, you are stuck with me, Austin Lawson." "Best thing that ever happened to me," Austin said seriously. "The absolute best thing." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead and listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Tabitha thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the cold streets of truth or consequences to this moment of perfect peace. She thought about the woman she had been, broken and desperate, and the woman she had become, strong and capable and loved. And she thought about the man beside her, who had seen past her desperation to the person she could be, and had given her the chance to become that person. "I want you to know something," Tabitha said quietly. "Even when things get hard, even when I am tired or frustrated or worried about money or the children or any of the 1,000 things that can go wrong on a ranch, I never regret choosing to stay that day. Never regret marrying you or building this life with you. You are the best decision I ever made, Austin." Austin turned to her, and in the moonlight she could see the emotion shining in his green eyes. "And you are mine," he said roughly. "Every single day, I thank God that I was in town that December afternoon, that I saw you and decided to stop. You changed my life, Tabitha, made it worth living in a way it had not been before." They kissed there in the moonlight, surrounded by the sounds and smells of the ranch they had built together, and Tabitha felt a completeness that was almost overwhelming. This was home. This man, this land, this life. It was everything she had never dared to dream of, and it was hers. The years continued to pass, bringing with them new joys and new challenges. Samuel did indeed marry Mary Henderson in a beautiful ceremony that had half of truth or consequences in attendance. They built a house on the eastern portion of the ranch and started their own family, giving Austin and Tabitha their first grandchildren, a boy and a girl who were doted on shamelessly by everyone. The twins eventually went away to school in Santa Fe, determined to get educations and see something of the world before deciding what they wanted to do with their lives. And though Tabitha missed them terribly, she was proud of their ambition and independence. Rose married as well, to one of the ranch hands who had been courting her patiently for 3 years. It was a quiet wedding, but no less joyful for its simplicity, and Tabitha wept happy tears as she watched her friend start a new chapter. Rose and her husband built a small house on the Lucky Star property, and they continued to work the ranch alongside Austin and Tabitha. The lucky star prospered beyond anyone's expectations. The horse breeding program Samuel had started took off, and their horses became known throughout the territory for their quality and temperament. The cattle operation continued strong, and they weathered droughts and harsh winters and everything else the land threw at them. Through it all, Austin and Tabitha stood together, partners in every sense of the word. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a huge party that seemed to include everyone they had ever known. There was music and dancing, and so much food that Tabitha was certain they would be eating leftovers for weeks. Speeches were made, toasts were given, and more than one person mentioned the story of how Austin and Tabitha had met, holding it up as an example of the kind of kindness and love that the West needed more of. As Tabitha looked around at the crowd, at the faces of people she loved and who loved her in return, she felt overwhelmed by gratitude. 25 years ago, she had been certain her life was over. She had stood in the cold, begging for scraps, and had seen no way forward. And then Austin had appeared, a stranger with kind eyes and a generous heart, and he had given her not just food or shelter but a future. The ranch had become more than just a place to live. It was a legacy, a testament to what two people could build when they refused to give up on each other or themselves. It was home to their children and grandchildren, and someday, God willing, to their great-grandchildren as well. The lucky star would endure long after Austin and Tabitha were gone, a living monument to the love that had started with a simple act of kindness. That night, after the last guest had left and the house was quiet, Austin and Tabitha walked out to the porch one final time. The December air was cold, reminding them both of that first meeting so many years ago, and they stood close together, wrapped in a shared blanket. 25 years, Austin mused. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like just yesterday that I saw you standing in the cold. I was so scared that day, Tabitha admitted. So certain that I had reached the end, and then you appeared and everything changed. You gave me hope when I had none, Austin. You gave me a reason to keep going. And you gave me a purpose, Austin replied. Before you, I was just going through the motions, working the ranch because it was what I did, but not really living. You taught me what it meant to truly share your life with someone, to build something together that was bigger than either of us alone. Tabitha turned in his arms, looking up at the face she had come to know as well as her own. There was silver in Austin's hair now and lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, but to her, he was as handsome as the day they met. I love you, she said simply. More now than ever, if that is possible. It is possible, Austin assured her, because I feel the same way. Every year that passes, I love you more. Every challenge we overcome together, every joy we share, it just adds to what I feel. You are my whole world, Tabitha Lawson. They kissed there on the porch, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, and had built a love that would last beyond their lifetimes. The stars wheeled overhead, cold and distant, but Austin and Tabitha were warm, wrapped in each other and the certainty of their love. As they finally went inside, closing the door on the cold December night, Tabitha took one last look at the ranch spread out before them. The house where their children had been raised, the barn where they worked side by side every day, the pastures full of cattle and horses, the smaller houses where Samuel and Rose lived with their families. It was all theirs, built from nothing through hard work and determination and love. She had begged for scraps in the December cold, and Austin had given her his ranch to call home. But more than that, he had given her his heart, his trust, and his unwavering support. He had seen her at her lowest point and had chosen to help, not because he expected anything in return, but because it was the right thing to do. And from that single act of kindness, an entire life had grown. Tabitha closed the door and turned to find Austin waiting for her, his hand outstretched. She took it, lacing her fingers through his, and together they walked through the house they had made a home. Past the photographs on the walls that chronicled their life together, past the furniture they had chosen, and the mementos they had collected. Every item told a story, and every story was part of the larger tapestry of their shared life. In their bedroom, Austin helped Tabitha out of her good dress and into her nightgown, his movements careful and familiar. They had shared this room for 25 years, had made love and argued and reconciled within these walls. They had held each other through grief and celebrated joy, and the room held all of it, every moment of their marriage etched into its very foundation. As they lay down together, Austin pulled Tabitha close, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. It was the same rhythm that had comforted her through nightmares and illness, through the pain of childbirth and the worry of raising children. It was the sound of home, of safety, of love. "Thank you," Tabitha whispered into the darkness, "for everything, for giving me a second chance at life." "Thank you for taking it," Austin replied, his voice rumbling in his chest beneath her ear, "for trusting me enough to stay. For building this life with me. I would not change a single day of it, Tabitha, not one." Tabitha smiled, feeling sleep begin to pull at her. "Neither would I," she murmured, "not a single day." They drifted off together, two souls so intertwined that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Outside, the December wind howled and the temperature dropped, but inside the Lucky Star Ranch house, all was warm and peaceful. The home that Austin had given to a desperate widow had become a sanctuary for an entire family, a place of love and laughter and enduring happiness. The story of how they met, of a cowboy who stopped to help a begging widow in the December cold, would be told and retold by their descendants for generations. It would become part of the family lore, a reminder that kindness matters, that love can grow in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments when we choose to help someone in need. But for Austin and Tabitha, lying together in the quiet darkness, it was not a story. It was their life, lived one day at a time, built on a foundation of mutual respect and deep, abiding love. They had started with nothing but hope and determination, and they had created something beautiful and lasting. The ranch would endure, their children would prosper, and the love they shared would ripple outward, touching lives they would never know. As the years continued to advance, both Austin and Tabitha aged with a grace that came from having lived fully and well. They handed over more and more of the ranch operations to Samuel and his capable hands, though they never fully retired. Austin could still be found most mornings checking on the horses, and Tabitha continued to teach, though her school was now run primarily by one of the twins, who had returned home after completing her education with a passion for bringing learning to rural children. They became the patriarch and matriarch of not just their family, but the entire community. People came to them for advice, for mediation of disputes, and simply for the comfort of being in the presence of two people who so clearly loved each other and their life. The Lucky Star became known as a place of refuge, just as it had been for Tabitha all those years ago, and Austin and Tabitha made sure that anyone who came to them in genuine need found help. On the morning of their 30th anniversary, Austin woke Tabitha early, before the sun had fully risen. "Come with me," he said mysteriously, helping her dress warmly against the December cold. "I have something to show you." Intrigued, Tabitha followed him outside and into the wagon he had prepared. They drove out across the ranch, past the main house and the barns, past Samuel's place and the winter pastures, until they reached the eastern boundary where the land they had purchased all those years ago met the new dawn. There, on a small rise overlooking the entire spread of the Lucky Star, Austin had built something. It was a simple structure, really, just a covered bench with a view of the ranch and the mountains beyond. But it was positioned perfectly to catch the sunrise, and as they sat down together, the sky began to lighten, painting the world in shades of pink and gold. "I built this for us," Austin said quietly. "A place where we can come and remember. Remember where we started, what we built, and why it all matters. Someday, when we are gone, our grandchildren will sit here and tell their children about the widow who begged for scraps and the cowboy who gave her his ranch. They will remember that love can change everything if you let it." Tabitha could not speak past the lump in her throat. She simply took Austin's hand and held it tight, watching as the sun rose over the land they had worked and loved for 3 decades. The Lucky Star spread out before them, alive and thriving, a testament to what they had built together. "It is perfect," she finally managed. "Just like everything you do, just like our life together." They sat in silence as the sun climbed higher, painting the ranch in morning light. Cattle moved slowly through the pastures, horses whinnied in the corrals, and smoke rose from the chimneys of the houses dotted across the property. It was a living, breathing entity, this ranch, and it was theirs in the deepest sense of the word. The Lucky Star had started as Austin's dream, a lonely cowboy's attempt to build something lasting in the harsh landscape of New Mexico. But it had become so much more. It was a family legacy, a community anchor, and a symbol of hope. It was proof that kindness mattered, that second chances existed, and that love could flourish even in the hardest of circumstances. As they finally stood to return to the main house, where their family would be gathering for the anniversary celebration, Austin pulled Tabitha close one more time. "I would do it all again," he said fiercely. "Every hard day, every struggle, every worry, I would do it all again if it meant ending up here with you." "So would I," Tabitha assured him. "1,000 times over I would choose this life, choose you, choose us." They walked back to the wagon hand in hand, their steps slower than they once were, but no less certain. Behind them, the sun continued to rise over the Lucky Star, illuminating everything they had built and everything they had become. The ranch would outlive them, passing to Samuel and his children and beyond. But the love that had created it, the kindness that had started it all, would live on in ways neither Austin nor Tabitha could fully imagine. Years later, when both Austin and Tabitha had passed on peacefully in their sleep, the family gathered at the overlook Austin had built. They told the story again, of the widow and the cowboy, of the December cold and the generosity that had changed everything. And as they looked out over the Lucky Star, still thriving under the care of the next generation, they understood that some love stories did not just end. They continued, rippling outward through time, touching lives and changing the world in small but significant ways. The ranch stood as a monument to that love, a place where anyone in need could find help, where families could build their futures, and where the legacy of Austin and Tabitha Lawson lived on. The story of how a desperate widow begging for scraps had been given a ranch to call home, and how she and the cowboy who helped her had built an empire of love and family, became the founding myth of the Lucky Star. And somewhere in the great beyond where such things are known, Austin and Tabitha smiled. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. They had proven that one act of kindness, one decision to help rather than pass by, could change not just 2 lives but generations. They had shown that love was stronger than despair, that hope could triumph over loss, and that sometimes the best things in life came from the hardest moments. The lucky star endured, a testament to their love, and the story of the widow and the cowboy who gave her his ranch to call home was told and retold, inspiring kindness and compassion in all who heard it. It was a good life they had lived, a good love they had shared, and a good legacy they had left behind. And in the end, that was all anyone could hope for and more than most could dream of achieving.